Hello and welcome back to the Epic Investor Podcast. My name is James Morrell, and today we're going to be discussing the importance of keeping your ego in check and how those who allow themselves to be governed by their egos can end up in very painful places. Let's get started. All right, I'm here with Rich Jarvis and Jason Morse. Guys, how are we doing today?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Welcome to Tuesday.
Welcome to Tuesday. So today is a pretty exciting topic. We're talking about ego. And if you read the book, Ego is the Enemy, or other books on ego, we all know that ego can be a pretty destructive thing in life. I wanted to add some color before we start on what ego truly is. And I wanted to actually ask you guys a question. Like, what comes to mind when you think of a person with a big ego? Because this term, I think, is actually pretty misunderstood. And so I was curious, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think this big ego, this person with the big ego?
LeBron James.
LeBron? Yeah. Fair enough. I can see, I know why already.
We could go either way. Like, Michael Jordan had an ego when he was on that court, and he well-deserved, right?
Yeah.
But I think how he handled that was different than...
And to be fair to all the athletes out there, you do have to have an ego to compete at a high level. I think in business, you've got to have some ego to propel things forward. But to answer your question, that's what came to mind.
Yeah.
Some of the most successful leaders that I can think about, did they have flaws? Absolutely. Who doesn't, right? But those successful leaders, their strengths were so good at what they did that it overshadowed any of those flaws. Then you have another leader that was particularly not very effective at all. But were they good leaders? No. Did they have strengths? I'm sure they did.
Exactly.
But their fatal flaws were so glaring that that's the only thing you could think about. And then when I think in terms of ego, did that person have ego? Absolutely. It was just channeled in the wrong ways and directions.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
It sounds like it manifested itself either way.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I think that's actually my next point, that ego is not one-sided. There's a spiritual teacher named Eckhart Tolle. Have you guys heard of him before? He has two famous books. One's called The Power of Now, and the other one's called A New Earth. But he talks about the misconceptions of ego. Obviously, when I first asked that question, LeBron or Michael, or the example he gives sometimes is like the quarterback of the football team in high school. Good-looking guy, superstar, walking in the hallways with the big Letterman jacket. That's kind of what we think of sometimes with ego. But it's not just one-sided. Ego in itself can be on the other side. It could be maybe the nerd, so to speak, if we're talking about high school, who is really insecure and kind of shies away from things. Both of those people are channeling and tying their actions and self-worth to this external idea and this external sense of self and who they think they are. The first point I wanted to talk about is how living with ego can put you on an emotional roller coaster. I've seen this a lot in my life, but it's, in this day of social media with the constant need for attention on your Instagram page or whatever it might be, when you get really high on praise and you're constantly seeking praise, I think it makes you highly susceptible to being, equally as low when inevitable critiques come. And so you can say there might be a person out there who their confidence and their ego is kind of boosted by maybe they're good looking and they like to be told they're good looking or they're pretty on the outside. And as they age, those things kind of go away and their whole self-worth was tied to it. And so now the emotional roller coaster starts going down. You could say this is the case with people maybe who their self-worth comes from status or power or perception of money. And then maybe they lose it and their self-worth is gone. Or
Yeah, I could see a t-shirt. My self-worth is tied to my dad bod.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love that.
I see that. That's funny.
And even people who maybe they don't lose those things. Maybe there's a person with tons of power and status and money who maintains it, but they're in a situation socially where the people around them value different things. And all of a sudden their sense of self, because it was so reliant upon these external forces, diminishes. And so in the investment world, it could be the same kind of thing, right? People might chase an overhyped investment fad or craze, and they might get lucky initially on something, but leading with ego ultimately is probably going to drive them to make some bad decisions that could cause lots of pain.
So a lot of people out there, they hit it big with crypto early, and I know lots of kids that made a ton of money really early in life, and didn't really apply any principle to crypto other than
luck.
They landed on black, right?
Yeah.
And then they would take that, that success, and they would go and try to continue to apply what they thought they were good at and just crash and burn in a royal manner because of, the ego of, I don't need help. I've got this. I'm successful. I made millions in 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not founded on anything. So I think that is true in today's society. It has been for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could you guys share some thoughts on maybe a time where you've seen, maybe it's yourself or someone you know, that ego has led them down the wrong path? And it could be personal, it could be investment related. But I know personally there's been times in my life, lessons I've learned where I wasn't doing what I was doing for the right reason. It was maybe to impress somebody or to try and appear a certain way. And maybe in the short term, it could have been a good thing. It was at least seen as a good thing. But for myself and instilling actual confidence in who I am, it's not, because it's not real. It's not authentic. Could you guys share a story about that in your personal lives or anyone you might know?
I grew up riding motorcycles all the time. And my mom and dad left for a trip to California. So I was home alone and couldn't think of anything else to do but to find his keys to his motorcycle. Right? To put it in perspective, when I was 15, I was quite short. I think I was 5'4" when I got my license, 130 pounds type thing. I could not touch the ground on this motorcycle. I got this very distinct impression to go put the motorcycle up. In my mind, I was like, no, I'm having fun. Why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
And a little while later, it says, go put the motorcycle up. And then very distinctly, like someone was right there talking. He's like, if you're not going to listen to me, at least go get a helmet on.
Yeah.
Ending with the punctuation, stupid. Right? And I was like, okay, I could do that. So I went and I got a helmet on, and it was one of those big full face helmets. And it wasn't 5 minutes later, I was coming up right in front of our house. There was an incline from the road. And I came up, I was going about 65 miles an hour. And my brother crossed the road and pulled out in front of me, and we collided. And that event right there took me 3 years before I could run again.
Mm-hmm.
And for a high school, that was pretty rough to go through that. Tying it back to the ego, it was, in my mind, I thought I knew best and that I could make these decisions, and I didn't need anyone else to tell me what I should or shouldn't do. One, I shouldn't have been riding my dad's motorcycle. I didn't have permission or anything like that. And so I was doing something that I knew was wrong, and did it anyway. And then when I had the impressions, I didn't listen to my authentic self, or essentially, I didn't listen to the Spirit tell me, stop what you're doing and go put it up. My life would have been infinitely changed in high school had I been able to continue, running and playing. Soccer was my main sport, but I think differently now when I hear the Spirit tell me to do something. And so I think to answer your question on ego and how it relates, I think for investors, it's the same way, where they think they know what they're doing. They get an idea that they want to do something to show off. And I was riding motorcycles to show off for friends at the time. And so they're trying to do investments and show off but they're not really listening to maybe that Spirit, or at least going to a higher power, or in this case, to those that can help them decide.
Right. Who have a true understanding of the market cycles. And
ego plays a huge role in people making mistakes. And then once the mistakes are made, they continue down that path because of ego, making it much, much worse.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great segue into the next point. You mentioned, I think, knowing or thinking you know exactly what you're doing. Another big point here is that when ego is in control, a person is much less likely to ask for help, right? That can happen for a variety of reasons. Maybe you're scared to ask for help because you don't want to look stupid. That's actually one of my personal flaws. I've seen myself in prior roles or prior jobs, like being afraid of asking something, because my idea of myself is I'm supposed to know it all. I'm supposed to have every answer to every question, and therefore I'm scared of asking something. But that actually puts you in a worse position, because then you don't learn what you need to know, and 6 months pass or whatever it might be, and you're actually still at square one if you haven't asked a single question. And we've talked before in this podcast about the need for control, that, okay, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to be the man in charge of all these projects. And as we've said so many times, more control does not mean less risk. And it can mean the opposite in many cases. If you're deciding you're going to take on some investment opportunity and you're going to manage it all yourself, but then you're going to run into problems inevitably that you've never had to encounter, right? This puts you in a bad position.
From an operations standpoint, we were running a project once up here in the Pacific Northwest, and the general manager, we acquired the company. The general manager had been part of that transition, worked for the previous owner and now for us. And he had this ego trip as the general manager that nobody could do anything without his stamp of approval. And I had come into the project, 3 years after the acquisition to provide fresh eyes and fresh support and to throw gas on the fire to get this thing to really start cooking. And recognized very quickly that this general manager was he was the kryptonite. He was stopping growth. He was stopping systems from taking hold. He was stopping managers at different locations from doing their job because he wanted the glory. He wanted the ability to say, I did that, or I made sure that was done. Even to a destructive point where he was taking credit for what other people had done, and he would say, well, I did that. And then I had another problem to fix, right? Now there's this cancer growing. So the amazing part for me was when we were having a meeting with all of the managers, and obviously the general manager is a big part of that meeting. And he cut in, and I can't remember exactly what was said, and it probably doesn't matter for this context, but we fired him in the middle of that meeting, asked him to collect his things and leave. And our senior manager stood up and said, I think everybody should take note that if Jason's willing to terminate our general manager, then everybody, including him, is replaceable. We need to get our crap together and move. And transformation occurred 2 weeks later. It was this palpable feel because ego had been dismissed. It's amazing to me how ego can destroy, we talk about our personal growth, right? If we're not willing to ask for help because I got this, I'll figure it out. I know how to find the answer. Leave me alone. Man, you kind of put yourself through this punishment. And then you recognize when you look backwards, the wake and the stakeholders that are now involved in your ego.
Ego can be so destructive in other forms too. You mentioned maybe as a bad manager, how big egoic leaders destroy their teams so quickly, actually, because it's not about the team. It's not about the people. There's no vision or values. It really is just about them, maybe power tripping, being insecure. Maybe their whole life was, built off of that negative ego, and now they're in this position of power, right? And so they're still in that external, okay, now I'm the man, and they might ruin themselves or their team. But it's just a reminder, I think, for investors that, it doesn't have to just be you. It shouldn't just be you. And if you have that tendency to think that you should be the one doing everything, whether it's out of a fear component or like even an overconfidence, if you were to channel that energy into leveraging core teams and understanding that there's people you can work with that can better your circumstances, that'll lead to a completely different outcome than just saying, I'm going to let my ego take control of the situation.
So what would you say the antidote of ego would be?
Eckhart Tolle in his book talks about presence, mindfulness. Because when you're mindful, ego can't really exist when you're totally present and you're not trying to impress people. You're not trying to be something you're not. You're really just present in yourself and what's happening. It's hard to do that though, like on a daily basis consistently. But he talks about mindfulness being the antidote to ego.
Being in a state of gratitude.
Yeah.
I think that helps a lot.
Right.
Well, when I'm sitting here trying to think, I feel like I come by this pretty honestly and naturally. I don't think I have an ego issue. And if I do, someone can tell me I do, and I'm happy to listen. But I'm trying to put the hat on of if I had an ego, how do I combat that? And I think the way you do it is you get trusted people around you, good relationships, and you just ask a lot of questions. Instead of interjecting your opinion and your thought, you just ask, what would you do in this situation? Or how do you feel about this investment? Or how do you feel about this deal? how would you handle this situation, and sit back and listen and truly, learn perspectives of other people. And perhaps that combats the need for being in control and putting your name on it. I think that, but again, it comes to the relationship.
I love that. I think that translates a lot to the investor mentality. Like if they're an investor in a business that just has been acquired, they don't understand maybe all of the aspects, but the market goes a little down, right? It's trending down, and then what steps in is that fear, right? But what's interesting is that initial reaction the investor has to, they have to do something to save their investment, which is the exact thing that would cause them to lose the investment.
Right.
Instead, sit back and start asking questions and start understanding of all of the different things going on. And there's a huge difference for the teams that we work with and that are able to talk about hard issues and have that conflict and challenge those ideas in a way that they're doing it because they support each other, they like each other, they respect each other enough to challenge what their thinking is. Mm-hmm. Versus, I got a text from an investor in a business that we're invested in. Between that investor and the founder of the company, there's been some head, and for a while the investor was integrally involved with the operations of the company. What's interesting to see from both sides, from the founder's point of view, the investor was starting to get too involved in the operations of the company instead of being an investor and supporting the company, right? Mm-hmm. And then from the investor's point of view, the founder wasn't doing enough in his mind to protect his investments and grow the company the way he thinks the company should be grown. You can have debates on both sides, right? But this is what's interesting. I get texts from the investor trying to prove why the founder is doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's a completely different shift. And I think ego is involved now in this relationship that's gone bad. And it's almost in a position of defense. And now he has to prove that someone's a villain in order to justify doing something poor or thinking poorly about him.
Ego has to be right. That's another key component of Eckhart's book, that when you're trying to be right, you have to have the last word, and you just, it's your fault. That's ego in there. And you could be right.
I love how you said that. And just, finishing that concept, what difference or how much different would it be? Because right now they are not speaking to each other. In fact, there's even talk of having restraining orders put into place. So it's gone from friendship to doing things together and eating at the same dinner table, right? That family experience, to restraining orders. And how different would it be to take, whatever was offensive or that caused it, to put that aside and go back to the root level of that relationship, saying, these behaviors are affecting the relationship and solving that. And I think ego prevents people from going from the content level to a deeper, whether it's a pattern or a deeper, relationship level of the partnership or group for that investor. Had they been able to kind of remove their ego from that content level of why they were offended and get back to the root of that relationship, I think it'd be a completely different outcome.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it requires vulnerability, right? And that's almost the opposite as well as of ego, as you mentioned before. Just to let go of your ego, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to admit that you were maybe wrong about something, which your ego doesn't want to do. So it hinders the learning process, because if you think you're always right and you're not willing to take ownership, or, it's never your fault, you'll never improve. And 10 years from now, you'll still be in that same seat. Big ego, probably ruining multiple areas of your life potentially.
Have you ever had the experience of getting together with a team and being intentional about checking everybody's ego at the door? I mean, we're getting ready to do another annual EOS meeting where that ego's at the door, right? We're not talking about, what our pride says or what we think, right? We're talking about raw we're going to analyze data, we're going to analyze results, we're going to analyze goals and aspirations and needs. And that ego gets checked at the door. I've always felt like when you can get the right people around the table, so this is a team thing, right, of who, and you can tell everybody, let's put our ego at that door. I mean, you can have an effective, quick meeting when you're not worried about being right.
Yeah.
You're worried about what's right and what's traction or what's gaining traction instead of saying it in a certain way that makes you feel important and makes you feel in charge, right? And I'm not pointing at you, James, because you are. I'm just, but I just, you can just like let go and be loose and free and way more effective.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's an art for sure. It doesn't happen easy. It doesn't come overnight.
No, I've loved this conversation. I think it's something that we should all keep in mind. If you're an investor, it's very important to keep in mind just in your personal life, everything. Ego can be very detrimental. And again, not to say that it's a bad thing. I think ego can be a positive thing if it's utilized in the right way, but keeping it in check is so important and it is so difficult. So
do you think investors want to invest in somebody that exhibits ego or has ego? Or do you think that is that a deterrent, or does that attract them to making that investment?
So can we say there's a difference between confidence in what you're doing and an ego that's not justified?
For sure.
And I think investors are attracted to the team. They invest in the people more so than they ever invest in a project. And I think they're looking for some type of leadership, some grit. When things go wrong, who's going to stand up and walk through the currents against them to get through to the other side and protect my investment? That requires confidence and strength. And I think you can do that and not have that be driven by an ego in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of situations I've been in where it depends on the person. There are a lot of investors that we have who I know if we walked in the room, in the perfect suit and tie and had Porsches and just being full of ourselves, big ego, that would be really unattractive. And that would be unattractive for all of us as people too. We don't like that kind of thing either. Not that you can't have a Porsche or a Rolex. That's awesome if you do. I'm just saying people tend to...
St. James.
Yeah, come on. we all want Porsches. And I think some people can be attracted to it on the surface, but just because that's what's on the surface of maybe a team you're looking to invest with does not mean the people under those suits or whatever it is are the kinds of people you want to work with, kind of alluding to your point.
There are two things I look at when I meet people. I look at what car they drive and I look at what shoes they wear. And that can go either way, right? Like when I'm actually getting ready to interview somebody at the office, I like to get close to the window and see what kind of car they pulled up in, or I'll catch them on their way out and see what they drive away in. I don't know why, but I always look at shoes, and I feel like shoes can kind of tell you a lot about a person. No, it's not the only thing, and no, it's not where you draw the line, but it's interesting to me how those visuals for me can help sometimes guide me one way or another, whether it's true or false, to what ego they might possess. And it's funny to me how that happens, because I am turned off by ego. When I meet somebody on the golf course and they pull up in the Land Rover and they've got the shiniest clubs and they've got, the next best driver and their cleats or their golf shoes are brand spanking new, and they just suck at golf. It's like, what are you trying to do? Like, I'm not faulting you for trying. I'm not faulting you for giving your effort. But for me, it's like, we want to be authentic and real. We want to be genuine people. And I would much rather somebody just walk up and say, I rented a set of clubs and these are my turf shoes that I wear to my son's baseball game. And I'm here to get to know you. Yeah. Like, man, that for me, the genuine and authenticity behind that, doesn't matter if you're going to hit 100 balls or one. I don't care.
Yeah.
So as I translate that into investing, I've always felt like when I look at people that want to invest in projects or are looking for advice on what to do, I've never wanted ego to drive them one way or another.
And I think one clarifying point, it's not to knock anyone who has, like, having nice things is fine. There's plenty of people who have the nicest stuff and they can be great people.
Oh yeah.
The tendency sometimes is that people who started off insecure get those things and then the ego projects. I think there's plenty of people out there who have all the nicest stuff and the way they still treat people with a lot of respect, and that's what matters in the end. It's just that kind of distinction. So we're not knocking people.
I hope.
Yeah. I like nice things.
How impressed would it be with that Land Rover guy, and he goes out and nails it. Oh yeah, of course. Then it'd be like, okay, that's a difference. That is different.
I hope the day that I have my Land Rovers and Porsches and cabins and lake houses, that I'm not different.
They're the same person.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's the point.
Yes.
On the investor side, because we've been talking a lot about personal examples and it's great context for our audience. Any other ideas come to mind on the investment side of, examples you've seen ego cause catastrophe or maybe success?
These guys made an investment. They had made lots of investments. They had probably done 19 or 20 different acquisitions, and they wanted to be, in one sector, in one part, in one state in the country, just because they liked the state and they thought it'd be cool to own a business there. So they bought a business.
Yeah,
and it was a complete flop. They, didn't really do any of the due diligence required or necessary to make a good decision, because the purpose of buying it was not because it was a good company. The purpose in buying it was because it'd be fun to go there. It'd be a fun business to own. It'd be fun to take our families there. All of the wrong reasons, right? To make a big investment. And it was a total blunder.
So we were doing debt funds, and essentially in debt funds, you're lending money on real estate, first position deed of trust, right? And you're getting, income coming in from those. You don't have any equity in it, but you have rights to that real property. And what was interesting is when the market shifted, and I remember investors saying, because the value was dropping, they had to get out now and sell for whatever they could, or they'll lose everything. And I think that comes from a point of ego. And ego kind of fans the flames of fear, in the sense that I've got to portray that I'm tough, but I'm scared to death that something's going to go wrong. So we have to take action and do something that ultimately is the exact wrong thing you do. The whole purpose of having things tied to a real hard, tangible asset is that it can last through multiple cycles. It's real.
Yeah.
And just because the value can change doesn't mean the utility and the staying power changes. And I think watching those investors get so tied up on their money that they originally put in, seeing the value now and thinking they've lost everything, and so they just had to get out.
Right.
Versus, you shut everything down. You don't get the monthly income at the time, but the value is still there. And then over time, now all of those properties are worth significantly more, right? And they were in a position where you could foreclose if needed, take the property back and just keep it until there's a better time to go. But instead, it was just sell everything off and get out of it. And it's not. I think ego fuels the flames of doubt. And just like that golfer that comes to the table, he knows he's not very good at golf. And so he tries to portray that he's really good at whatever he's doing. And then when it actually comes to the table, he can't perform.
I was actually thinking of the quote by Mario Andretti that says, when everything seems under control, you're just not going fast enough. The reason I thought of that is, how do I combat, one way to combat ego, when you're kind of sitting at your desk, or maybe you're watching over your investments and you're just like, man, everything's just humming along and it's perfect. Something is brewing that you're not aware of, which is why I always fall back on like KPIs and scorecards. That data can tell you if things really are humming along or if you're just not aware.
Well, this has been fun. I hope our audience has enjoyed this episode. I really certainly have. And so I appreciate all your guys' feedback and your stories today. And if this episode has been helpful for you, please do share it. And as we always say, we love to hear your stories. And maybe you'll learn something here today. You have learned something that will be helpful moving forward. And we'd love to hear a success story about that.